The sun slanted through the dusty attic window, illuminating tiny motes of dust dancing in the air like tiny, forgotten stars. 16-year-old Anya sat on the creaky wooden floor, surrounded by the silent ghosts of her family's past. Her mother, Lena, moved slowly, her hands gentle as she lifted items from a cardboard box. The air smelled of old paper and cedar, a scent that always felt like a hug from the past. Lena pulled out a faded, black-and-white photograph, the edges soft with wear. In it, a young woman with a bright, hopeful smile sat at a gleaming grand piano, her fingers poised over the keys as if ready to unleash a symphony. "Look at that," Lena whispered, her voice holding a trace of a dream long since put away. "That was me. I was going to see the world, one concert hall at a time." She traced the outline of the piano in the photo with a fingertip. "I practiced for hours every day. My fingers knew the keys better than they knew my own face." A wistful sigh escaped her lips, a sound so quiet Anya almost missed it. But then life happens, doesn't it? You grow up, you have responsibilities, and some dreams they fade into the background. Anya looked from the photograph to her mother. She saw the faint lines around her eyes that hadn't been there in the picture, the way her shoulders slumped slightly from years of hard work and a recent illness that had stolen the energy from her step. A powerful, unshakable feeling bloomed in Anya's chest. It wasn't just sadness for her mother's lost dream. It was a fierce, burning desire to give a piece of it back. In that moment, looking at the faded photo and her mother's tired but beautiful face, she made a silent promise. She would learn to play that song, the one her mother sometimes hummed when she thought no one was listening. She would bring the music back into her mother's life. The next few days were a blur of quiet determination. Anya spent her evenings scrolling through online marketplaces, her eyes scanning for one thing, a piano. Most were far too expensive, polished, and perfect instruments that belonged in mansions, not in their small, modest home. Then, late one night, she found it, an ad for a free upright piano. "Need some love?" U-Haul? The photo was dark and grainy, but she could see its shape, tall and proud like a silent sentinel. Her heart leaped. It wasn't a grand piano, but it was a start. Her father, a man of few words but many actions, agreed to help. They borrowed a friend's trailer and drove to the other side of town, to a house with an overgrown yard. The piano was even more dilapidated in person, its wood finish scratched and cloudy, some of the ivory keys yellowed or chipped. To Anya, it was perfect. It was a project, a mission. Getting it into the trailer was a struggle of grunts and sweat, a heavy, awkward dance between father and daughter. As they drove home, the old piano sat strapped down. A symbol of a promise in transit, squeezing it into the garage was another puzzle. The space was already cluttered with tools, old bicycles, and boxes of things they meant to sort through one day. They pushed and shoved, creating a small corner for it. Finally, it stood there, tucked away but present. The garage was cold and smelled of gasoline and cut grass, but to Anya it felt like a sacred space. She ran a hand over its dusty surface, then lifted the fallboard. The keys stared back at her, a row of faded teeth. She pressed one. A dull, discordant thud echoed in the quiet garage. It was out of tune, tired, and neglected. It was a challenge. Her resolve, however, was met with a storm of ridicule from the one place she hoped to find support, her own family. Her older brother Leo, a star on the school's basketball team, walked in as she was trying to pluck out a simple melody. He leaned against the doorframe, a smirk on his face. "What in the world are you doing?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're going to what? Bang on that old thing? It sounds like a dying cat." Anya's cheeks grew hot. "I'm learning," she said quietly, not turning around. "Learning what?" "How to give everyone a headache." He scoffed. "Mom's not going to get better because you're making noise in the garage. You should be out with friends, not playing with Grandma's junk." His words were like little stones, sharp and painful. He didn't understand. To him, it was just a noisy, space-wasting object. To her, it was a bridge to her mother's happiness. The mockery at school was even worse. It wasn't direct, not at first. It was a slow, creeping poison. Anya would sit in the cafeteria, looking at sheet music she'd printed from the library computer, and she could feel the eyes on her. Chloe, the girl who seemed to rule the school with an effortless smile and a sharp tongue, would walk by with her friends. They wouldn't say anything to her face, but she would hear the whispers as they passed. "Still on that piano kick?" One of them would giggle. "My grandma listens to music like that," another would say. Just loud enough for Anya to hear one afternoon. Anya was practicing a simple scale on a piano app on her phone during a free period. Chloe leaned over her desk, her shadow falling across the screen. "Oh, that's cute," she said, her voice sweet as poison. "Are you going to play for the old folks' home next?" Her friend snickered behind her. The heat of embarrassment washed over Anya, so intense it felt like a physical blow. She wanted to shrink, to disappear into the floor. She quickly put her phone away, her hands trembling slightly. That evening, the weight of it all felt crushing. Her brother's taunts echoed in her mind, mingling with Chloe's laughter. She sat on the stool in the cold garage, staring at the silent keys. What if they were right? What if this was a stupid, pointless dream? The piano seemed to mock her, a monument to her own foolishness. Her fingers hovered over the keys, but she couldn't bring herself to press them down. Defeat felt close, a cold, heavy blanket, but then an image flashed in her mind, her mother in the attic, holding the photograph, a sad, beautiful smile on her face as she hummed a few bars of a melody she had never forgotten. The memory was a spark in the darkness. This wasn't for Leo, it wasn't for Chloe or her friends. It wasn't even for the whole school. It was for the woman who had given up her own music so that her children could have a life filled with it, in whatever form they chose. A new, fierce determination hardened in Anya's heart. Let them laugh. Let them whisper. They had no idea what she was fighting for. She took a deep breath, placed her fingers back on the cool, yellowed keys, and began to play again, one clumsy, determined note at a time. The sound was still imperfect, but this time it was full of purpose. The days that followed were not filled with the triumphant sound of music, but with the stubborn, awkward noise of effort. Anya's journey was far from the beautiful cinematic montage she had imagined. The reality was a cold garage, a stiff wooden stool, and a piano that seemed to fight back at every turn. Her fingers, which she had always thought were nimble, felt like stiff, uncooperative sausages on the keys. They would press down, and instead of a clear, singing note, a dull thud or a jarring clang would emerge. The beautiful, flowing melody of Claire de Lune, the song she had heard in a video online, sounded like a series of disconnected, painful hiccups under her hands. She would spend hours after school in that garage, the fading light filtering through the small, grimy window. Her phone was propped up on the music stand, a YouTube tutorial playing on a loop. A kind-faced man on screen would explain the fingering for a chord, his hands moving with an easy grace that Anya could only dream of. She would pause the video, place her fingers in what she thought was the correct position, and press down. The result was always a mess, a sour chord that made her wince. She would try again and again, her frustration growing with each failed attempt. The isolation was a physical presence. It was in the cold air that seeped through her jacket, in the smell of gasoline and lawn mower from the corner, and in the silence that followed every one of her mistakes. Her home, which should have been a refuge, quickly became another source of pressure. Her brother Leo seemed to take a personal offense to her new hobby. At first it was just verbal jabs whenever he passed the garage, but soon his mockery became more active. He would wait until she was in the middle of a difficult passage. Then he'd crank up the bass on his sound system in his room, the walls vibrating with a heavy, thumping beat that would completely drown out her delicate piano notes. He'd stand in the doorway, smirking, phone in hand, as if he were filming a documentary on the world's worst musician. "Are you trying to summon a spirit or something?" He'd yell over the noise. "Because I think it's working, and it sounds angry." Their father, tired from a long day at work, would just ask them to keep it down, not having the energy to mediate. Anya felt invisible, her struggle seen as nothing more than a noisy annoyance. The social pressure at school became a constant. low-grade hum of anxiety in the back of her mind. The whispers in the hallway were one thing, but Chloe and her friends had escalated their campaign. Anya found out about it through a friend of a friend. They had created a group chat, and the name, when she heard it, made her stomach drop. Anya's Garage Band. It was a perfect, cruel joke. They weren't just mocking her. They were turning her private, personal mission into a public spectacle for their own entertainment. She never saw the messages herself, but she heard about them. They would post memes of old people with hearing aids. They would share videos of cats walking on keyboards and caption it, Anya's new single. One afternoon, she was walking past a group of them huddled together in the cafeteria, their phones out. She heard Chloe's distinct, sharp laugh. "Oh my God, you guys, listen to this," Chloe said, and then held up her phone, playing a short, distorted audio clip. It was the sound of Anya playing, recorded from outside the garage door. It was a mess of wrong notes and hesitant pauses. The group erupted in laughter. Anya froze, her tray of food feeling heavy in her hands. Her face burned with a humiliation so intense it felt like a physical weight. She could feel their eyes on her as she walked away, her steps quick and unsteady. She didn't go back to the cafeteria for the rest of the week. She ate her lunch in the library, hidden in the back stacks, the silence a small comfort. The mockery wasn't just about the piano anymore. It was about her. It was about her passion, her love for her mother, being twisted into something pathetic and laughable. One evening, after a particularly brutal day at school, the dam finally broke. She had been trying to master a single, difficult transition in the music for over an hour. Her fingers were cramping and her patience was gone. Every time she played it, a jarring wrong note would stick out like a sore thumb. In a fit of frustration, she slammed her hands down on the keys, creating a loud, discordant crash that echoed in the small space. Tears of anger and defeat welled up in her eyes. "I can't do this," she whispered to the empty garage. "It's stupid." "They're right." She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the icon for the browser. She was going to look up how to sell a used, out-of-tune piano for parts. But before she could, a notification popped up. It was a screenshot from the group chat sent to her by an anonymous number. The message read, "Heard her practicing again today. Seriously, how long is she going to waste her youth on that? It sounds like a haunted house is being demolished." Below it was a string of crying with laughter emojis. That was it. The final straw. The humiliation was no longer a whisper. It was a shout. The tears she had been holding back began to fall, hot and silent. She dropped her phone onto the floor and buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs. It was all pointless. The dream was stupid. She was never going to be good enough. Her mother would never get to hear the beautiful music she imagined. All she was doing was making noise and making herself a target. She sat there for a long time, the cold seeping into her bones, the silence of the garage feeling heavy and final. She was done. She would tell her dad tomorrow that he could get rid of the piano. She would go back to being invisible. It was safer. Just as she was about to stand up and leave the garage for good, she heard a faint sound coming from the house. It was so soft she almost thought she'd imagined it. She wiped her eyes and listened. It was a humming, a quiet, gentle melody that drifted through the thin wall separating the garage from the kitchen. She knew that tune. It was Claire de Lune. Curiosity pulling at her, she quietly opened the side door and slipped into the house. The lights in the living room were dim. Her mother was asleep on the couch, a thin blanket pulled up to her chin. Her face, pale in the soft lamplight, looked peaceful but tired. As she slept, she continued to hum the song. It wasn't perfect. The melody was fragmented, a few notes here, a small phrase there, like a half-remembered dream. But it was there. The music was inside her. Anya stood in the doorway, her heart aching with a love so powerful it pushed out all the anger and humiliation. This wasn't about Chloe or Leo or a stupid group chat. It wasn't about proving them wrong or getting a standing ovation. It was about this. It was about this quiet, tired woman who was still humming the song of a dream she let go of decades ago. It was about giving that dream back to her, even for just a few minutes. A new resolve, quiet but unbreakable, settled in her heart. It wasn't the fiery, defensive determination from before. This was something deeper. It was pure and focused. She turned and walked back into the garage without a sound. She sat down on the cold stool, her tears now dry. She looked at her hands, no longer seeing them as clumsy and useless, but as the only way to bring the music out. She placed her fingers on the keys, took a soft breath, and began to play again. The notes were still hesitant. The mistakes were still there. But this time, the sound was not just noise. It was a promise, and it was filled with love. The resolve that had carried Anya back to the piano keys after her moment of despair was a quiet, steady flame, but it was still fragile. The days turned into weeks, and the cold garage remained her lonely rehearsal space. Her dedication was unwavering, but her progress felt like wading through thick mud. She could now play the simple melodies from the online tutorials without too many mistakes. But Claire de Lune was a different beast. It was a complex tapestry of sound, and she was still just trying to figure out how to thread a single needle. The old piano, with its stiff action and slightly off-key notes, fought her at every turn. She felt like she was trying to paint a masterpiece with a frayed brush and muddy water. One chilly Tuesday evening, as she was struggling through a particularly tricky arpeggio, a soft knock echoed on the garage door frame. Anya jumped, her fingers crashing down on the keys in a discordant jangle. Standing there was Mr. Harrison, the school's music teacher. He was a tall, thin man with kind eyes and a perpetually surprised look, as if he were constantly hearing a beautiful melody no one else could. He was known for being a bit of a recluse, usually disappearing into the music room after the last bell and not emerging until the next morning. "I'm so sorry," Anya stammered, her face flushing. "I didn't mean to disturb you." He shook his head, a gentle smile on his face. "You weren't disturbing me. I was just locking up and I heard." "Well, I heard someone trying to tell a story." He stepped inside, his gaze sweeping over the dilapidated piano and then settling on Anya. "It's a beautiful story, even if it's a little hard to understand right now." Anya didn't know what to say. No one had ever described her clumsy playing as a story before. Mr. Harrison seemed to sense her confusion. He walked over and stood beside the piano. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the bench. Anya nodded and slid over. He sat down, his long, elegant fingers resting on the yellowed keys for a moment. Then he began to play. It was the same piece Anya was struggling with, but coming from his hands, it was a completely different world. The notes flowed like a river, smooth and full of emotion. The music filled the cold garage, chasing away the shadows and the smell of gasoline. It was breathtaking. When he finished, the silence that followed felt warm and respectful. "You see," he said softly, "the story is in there. It just needs the right voice." He looked at her, his eyes full of a genuine curiosity. "Why are you learning this, if you don't mind my asking?" "It's not a simple piece for a beginner." For the first time, Anya found herself telling the whole story to someone outside her family. She told him about the photograph in the attic, about her mother's faded dream, and about her promise to play Claire de Lune for her. As she spoke, Mr. Harrison listened intently, nodding slowly, his kind eyes never leaving her face. When she finished, he didn't offer pity. He offered something much better. "Your mother's dream didn't fade," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "It just went dormant, waiting for the right person to wake it up." He stood up. "This piano," he said, patting the old upright gently, "it has character, but it's holding you back. The music room at school has a proper grand piano, and it's empty after 4 o'clock every day." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small brass key. He placed it in Anya's hand. "Come by tomorrow after school. We'll see if we can't help you find your voice." The next day, Anya walked into the school music room with a sense of awe. It was a world away from her garage. The air was warm and smelled of wood polish and old sheet music. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating a sleek, black grand piano that sat in the center of the room like a king on its throne, Mr. Harrison was already there. Arranging some music on a stand, their lessons became the highlight of Anya's life. He didn't just teach her the notes, he taught her the language of music. He showed her how to curve her fingers to strike the keys with more power and grace. He explained the dynamics, the quiet whispers and the loud, emotional cries hidden in the score. He taught her to listen, not just to the notes she was playing, but to the spaces between them. The silence is just as important as the sound, he'd say. It's where the breath is. Under his guidance, Anya's playing transformed. The clumsy, hesitant notes began to connect into flowing phrases. The music started to breathe. She would practice for hours in the empty music room, the sound of the grand piano filling the space and her heart. She was no longer just trying to hit the right notes. She was trying to pour all the love she felt for her mother into every single key. One afternoon, a few weeks before her mother's birthday, Mr. Harrison watched her play through the entire piece. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Anya," he said finally, "that was beautiful, truly." He paused, then a thoughtful look crossed his face. "Have you considered signing up for the school talent show?" The suggestion hit Anya like a splash of cold water. The talent show? In front of the whole school? In front of Chloe and her friends? In front of Leo? "No," she said quickly, her heart starting to pound. "I couldn't. I'm not ready for that." "Are you sure?" he asked gently. "Music is meant to be shared. Your story, it's a powerful one. Think of it not as a performance, but as a conversation. You have something important to say. This could be your chance to say it." He didn't push, but the seed was planted. That night, Anya couldn't sleep. The idea of performing on stage was terrifying. She imagined the whispers, the laughter, the phones recording her every mistake. But then she imagined something else. She pictured her mother sitting in the audience, her face illuminated by the stage lights. She pictured the look of surprise, then pride, then pure joy on her face as she recognized the melody. The thought was so powerful it overshadowed all her fear. This wasn't about proving Chloe wrong. It was about giving her mother the gift she deserved. A gift witnessed by the world. The next day, with a hand that trembled slightly, she signed her name on the audition list for the talent show. Of course, the news spread like wildfire. Leo found out and just shook his head, a look of pity on his face. "You're really going through with this?" he said. "You're setting yourself up for a public disaster, sis. Don't come crying to me when everyone is laughing." His words stung, but her newfound resolve was a shield. Chloe's reaction was even more pointed. The day the list of performers was posted in the main hallway, Anya saw her and her friends gathered around it. Chloe's eyes scanned the list, and when they found Anya's name, a slow, predatory smile spread across her face. She pulled out her phone, and a moment later, Anya's phone buzzed. It was a notification from the GarageBand chat. Chloe had posted a picture of the sign-up list with Anya's name circled in red. The caption read, "Get your phones ready, people. Live entertainment is coming. This is going to be epic." The string of laughing emojis that followed felt like an army of tiny, mocking soldiers marching into her mind. But this time, Anya just took a deep breath, put her phone away, and walked toward the music room. She had a conversation to prepare for. The night of the talent show arrived with a nervous energy that seemed to crackle in the air around the school auditorium. Backstage was a chaotic mix of buzzing lights, tangled cables, and the anxious pacing of students in various states of costume and dress. Anya sat on a folding chair, her sheet music clutched in her hands so tightly her knuckles were white. The paper felt damp from her sweat. Every few minutes, a new act would be announced, followed by a wave of applause or a smattering of polite claps from the other side of the heavy velvet curtain. Each sound made her heart jump. Mr. Harrison found her huddled in a corner, trying to make herself small. He didn't say much, just crouched down in front of her so they were eye to eye. "Remember what we talked about?" he said, his voice calm and steady. "This isn't for them. It's a conversation. Just you and your mom. The rest of us are just lucky enough to be in the room to listen." He gave her a small, reassuring smile. "You've done the work. Now just tell the story. His words were a small anchor in the storm of her fear. She nodded, taking a deep, shaky breath. Out in the auditorium, the atmosphere was completely different. It was a sea of chattering teenagers, their faces lit by the glow of their phone screens. Anya's mother, Lena, sat in the front row, a place Mr. Harrison had reserved for her. She looked tired, but her eyes were fixed on the stage, shining with an anticipation that was almost palpable. She had a small, worn-out photograph in her lap, the one of her at the piano, her thumb gently stroking its edge, a few rows back. Her brother Leo slumped in his seat, looking bored and annoyed. He had only come because their father had insisted. He scrolled through his phone, barely looking up, ready for the whole embarrassing ordeal to be over. And then there was Chloe and her group, seated strategically in the middle with a clear view of the stage. Their phones were not just in their laps. They were held up, cameras already recording, ready to capture every fumbled note. They whispered and giggled, sharing a private joke at Anya's expense. The stage lights glinted off Chloe's phone screen as she adjusted her angle, a predatory smirk on her face. And now, for our next performance, a voice from the stage announced, we have Anya, playing the piano. A few polite claps from the audience were quickly swallowed by a fresh wave of whispers and a few unmistakable giggles from Chloe's direction. This was it. Anya's legs felt like lead as she walked from the wings into the single, harsh spotlight. The auditorium, which had been a noisy, blurry mass, was now a wall of darkness dotted with hundreds of unseen eyes. The walk to the grand piano felt like the longest journey of her life. Each step was heavy with the weight of everyone's expectations, both good and bad. She sat on the bench, the polished wood cool and smooth under her fingers. She placed her sheet music on the stand, though she knew she wouldn't really need it. The notes were etched into her heart now. She could hear the rustling of programs, the quiet coughs, the whispers. "This is going to be a train wreck," she heard someone mutter from the darkness. Her hands hovered over the keys, trembling. For a terrifying second, her mind went completely blank. Then she looked past the blinding light into the front row. She saw her mother's face, turned up towards her, a look of pure, unwavering love and encouragement. In that moment, the sea of faces disappeared. The whispers faded away. It was just the two of them, connected by a promise made in a dusty attic. Anya took a soft breath, and her fingers touched the keys. She began to play. The opening notes of Claire de Lune floated into the silent hall, delicate and pure like moonlight on water. They were hesitant at first, a quiet question asked into the vastness of the room. The giggling from Chloe's row didn't stop immediately, but it faltered, becoming confused, uncertain. The notes were not clumsy or discordant. They were beautiful as the melody grew, Anya's confidence bloomed. Her fingers, which had once felt so awkward, now moved with a grace she didn't know she possessed. She wasn't just hitting the right notes. She was pouring every ounce of her journey into the music. The frustration of the lonely hours in the garage was in the passionate, swelling crescendos. The sting of her brother's words and her classmates' mockery was in the haunting, melancholic passages. And above it all, weaving through every single note, was a deep, powerful current of love for the woman who had given up everything for her. The music filled the auditorium, pushing out the restlessness and the noise. The audience, which had been shifting and whispering, was now completely still. One by one, phones were lowered. The scrolling stopped. The recording was forgotten. Chloe's phone, which had been angled to capture a failure, slowly sank to her lap. Her smirk was gone, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. She was no longer seeing a target for ridicule. She was witnessing something raw, something real, something she couldn't mock or understand. Leo had put his phone down completely. He sat up straight in his seat, his bored expression melting away, replaced by one of awe. He was no longer hearing noise from the garage. He was hearing a story of his sister's heart that he had been too blind and too arrogant to see. He watched her hands fly across the keys, and for the first time, he saw not his weird, quiet little sister, but a person with a strength and a passion that dwarfed his own petty concerns. The melody swelled to its emotional peak, a wave of sound so powerful and full of feeling it seemed to make the very air in the room vibrate. It was the sound of a dream being reborn, of a promise being fulfilled. Then, as gently as it began, the music started to recede, the notes becoming softer, more intimate, until finally she played the last resonant chord. She let her fingers rest on the keys as the final note hung in the air, shimmering and beautiful for a breathtaking moment. Then it faded into absolute, complete silence. The entire auditorium was utterly, completely speechless. No one moved. No one spoke. It was a silence so profound it was louder than any applause. It was the sound of 100 hearts being touched at once. Anya sat at the piano, her own tears now falling freely, her gaze still locked on her mother, who was also crying, a beautiful, radiant smile on her face. The silence was her victory. It was the moment she had left everyone, for just a few seconds, speechless. The silence in the auditorium was a living thing. It stretched on, thick and heavy, a shared moment of breathtaking awe. Anya sat at the grand piano, her fingers still resting on the keys, her body trembling with the release of all the emotion she had poured into the music. The single spotlight felt warm now, not harsh. She looked out at the wall of darkness, but she wasn't afraid anymore. She had done it. She had told her story, then a single person rose to their feet in the front row. It was her mother, Lena. Tears streamed down her face, but her smile was like the sun breaking through the clouds. She began to clap. It wasn't loud, but it was fierce, a sound of pure, unadulterated pride and love that cut through the quiet. It was the sound of a dream being witnessed. A moment later, Mr. Harrison stood up beside her, his applause steady and respectful. Then a movement a few rows back caught Anya's eye. It was Leo. He was on his feet, his phone forgotten on the empty seat beside him. His bored expression was gone, replaced by a look of humbled awe. He clapped, slowly at first, then with more conviction. It was as if his approval broke a spell. A wave of movement rippled through the crowd as one by one, then all at once, the entire audience rose to their feet. The applause that followed was deafening, a roar of genuine appreciation and respect that washed over Anya, shaking her to her core. It wasn't just polite clapping. It was a tidal wave of emotion, a cathartic release for everyone in the room. Anya could only sit there, her own tears now falling freely, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. Backstage was a whirlwind of noise and light, but Anya only had eyes for one person. Her mother pushed through the small crowd, her arms open wide. She enveloped Anya in a hug that felt like it could heal anything. They stood there for a long time, just holding each other, the roar of the crowd still echoing in the background. "That was the most beautiful gift I have ever received," her mother whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "More beautiful than I ever could have imagined." She pulled back, her hands cupping Anya's face, her thumbs wiping away the tears. "You didn't just play the notes, my love. You played my heart." Anya couldn't speak. She just shook her head, a fresh wave of tears coming as she buried her face in her mother's shoulder. All the lonely hours, all the mockery, all the doubt, it had all led to this single, perfect moment of connection. It was worth everything. As her mother held her, Anya saw a familiar figure approaching hesitantly. It was Leo. He looked awkward, his hands shoved in his pockets, unable to meet her eyes. The usual cocky swagger was gone, replaced by a genuine humility that Anya had never seen in him before. "Anya," he said, his voice quiet. I'm so sorry." He finally looked up, and his eyes were sincere. "For everything I said. I had no idea. I was a jerk. You were incredible, truly." He seemed to run out of words, but the apology hung in the air, genuine and heartfelt. Anya just nodded, a small, forgiving smile touching her lips. In that moment, the wall between them crumbled, replaced by a new understanding. Just then, Chloe appeared from the edge of the backstage crowd. She looked smaller, less intimidating without her friends around her. Her usual smirk was gone, replaced by a look of sincere humility. She didn't try to make a joke or regain her composure. She just looked at Anya directly and honestly. "You were amazing," she said quietly. It wasn't a compliment laced with sarcasm. It was a simple, truthful statement. Then, as if she didn't know what else to say, she gave a small, awkward nod and turned, disappearing back into the throng of people. It wasn't a grand apology, but it was an admission of respect, and for Anya, it was more than enough. The story didn't end with fame or a record deal. It didn't end with a dramatic transformation where she became the most popular girl in school. The real ending was quieter and much more meaningful. A few weeks later, the atmosphere in the house had changed. The old upright piano was no longer in the cold, lonely garage. With the help of her father and brother, they had moved it into the living room. It now sat in a place of honor, near the window where the afternoon sun would dance on its keys. The scratches and yellowed ivory no longer looked like signs of neglect, but like marks of a journey. The mocking had completely stopped. Leo would sometimes sit in the living room while Anya practiced, not to tease her but just to listen. He even asked her once to teach him a simple melody, a request that made them both laugh. The group chat Anya's garage band had quietly dissolved, its purpose rendered meaningless. At school, people would smile at her in the hallways, a silent acknowledgement of what they had witnessed. Chloe and her friends no longer bothered her. They simply existed in different worlds now. One quiet Saturday afternoon, the sun was streaming into the living room. Anya's mother was sitting on the piano bench beside her. The old photograph was now in a frame on top of the piano, a constant reminder of the promise that had started it all. "Show me again," her mother said, her voice soft. Anya smiled. She gently took her mother's hands, which were often stiff and sore. She placed her mother's fingers on the keys, her own hands guiding them. "Just like this," she said softly. "Press down gently." Her mother's finger, guided by Anya's, pressed a single soft key. A clear, perfect C note resonated in the quiet room. It was a simple sound, but it was filled with a lifetime of meaning. It was the sound of a dream not just being remembered, but being reborn. It was the sound of a daughter's love healing an old wound. It was a sound that resonated with a warmth and a joy that no amount of mocking could ever silence. And in that small, sunlit room, surrounded by family, the music had finally come home.